Hello and welcome to the therapy show behind closed doors. My name is Kellie Barratt and I'm here with the wonderful Mr. Bob Cooke.
Hello.
Hello, how are you, Bob? Good to see you.
Very well. In fact, I've just had a most wonderful fish dinner that
Ah,
Stephanie made me with new potatoes and broccoli. So I feel really sort of nourished, and I'm raring to go on this podcast.
fabulous, because that does sound like a very nutritious meal. And I'm still a bit hungry. I've not had mine yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't know that.
So today we're on episode number 205. And the title is Does the Therapist's Gender Play a Crucial Part in the Therapy Room?
That's a wonderful title I thought up. I'm always very interested in that, and the answer is yes, in my opinion.
Okay.
Very, very big part.
Uh-huh.
And there's several ways of looking at this, but I'm going to start off with a concept Freud came up with
Hmm.
all these 130 years ago with the psychoanalytical movement and psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
And he came up with the concept of transference.
Uh-huh.
So when we're thinking about talking about whether the gender makes a difference in the therapy room,
Hmm.
then the biggest way of looking at this, I think,
Yeah.
is through the eyes of transference. I'm assuming everybody who's watching this knows what transference means, but
Well, they might not, might they, Bob? Because, if they're trainees or they're not in TA or any kind of analysis
well,
training.
transference isn't a TA phrase.
No,
Transference is
it's an
common.
analysis thing, isn't it?
Well, it comes from psychoanalysis, but okay, counsellors will do as well. But we'll go with what you're saying then. Okay, transference simply means what the other person projects onto you.
Hmm.
So you're, in psychoanalytical terms, should be called the object.
Yeah.
So and the client's the object, of course.
Hmm.
So in this process, the client will transfer onto the therapist an object from the history, or, of course, part of themselves, the younger
Hmm.
part of themselves. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be a person, particularly. It could be, it might project hopelessness, for example, helplessness, or whatever. Um, and in the supervision courses I run, I'm always talking about that a therapist needs to think about, sorry, a supervisor needs to think about when they're talking to a therapist in supervision. A very good question is, who is the client? What are they projecting onto the therapist?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So let's take that back to gender then. And of
Uh-huh.
course, we've got countertransference, which is the other
Yes.
side of this. Is
Okay.
that's the what the therapist will transfer back onto the client. So
Mhm.
there's two parts of transference.
Yeah.
And very important in talking about this discussion.
Uh-huh.
So if we're looking at this discussion through the transference lens,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on that? I know you've worked a long time, so if we look
Yeah.
at it through transference,
Yeah.
you, when we look at it like that, I think gender plays a really big part in it in terms of a transferential process. What's your thoughts?
Yes, I agree. I see it in group when I'm in group therapy. So that can happen to quite a few people. So the group might become like a client's family, for example. Things do get transferred onto us all the time, and it's our job to not, to be aware of that.
Mm. Yeah, so gender does matter, and at the same time, clients will transfer particular qualities
Mm.
onto the therapist. So, for example, um, they may transfer onto you or see in you certain male qualities, perhaps,
Uh-huh.
or in terms of their transference, their history,
Yeah.
that you remind them of your dad,
Yeah.
or you remind them of teacher, and whoever
Mhm.
that might
Yeah.
be male.
Mhm.
At the same time, they may transfer female qualities onto you.
Mhm.
They may also transfer an idealized other onto you.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
most common one to transfer onto therapists is what the client didn't have.
Yes. Yeah.
So I used to get a lot of transference, and I'm sure you will as well, which is around the grandfather, the father that they didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
So in the transference,
Yeah.
I would become idealized
Mm-hmm.
because, if you think of therapy as reparative,
Mm-hmm.
it's about that, looking in that context in terms of the client. I become, something they didn't have.
Does it ever happen where you become what they didn't want, for
Yeah.
example? Yeah.
So that would be called negative transference.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's very, very common, as
Mm.
common as positive transference.
Mm.
So I could might become their father, their who they didn't like,
Mm-hmm.
or the grandfather that was not very nice to them, or I might be the father that is very much like the father that they didn't get on with.
Yeah.
So, for example, I remember a particular person who I saw this is when I was seeing clients, and I remember the first session, and I sat down, and the client came in, and I would say 3 minutes into the first session, so not much you would think happens, or you
Yeah.
might say to me that happens. I think a
Yeah.
lot happens.
Yes, it does.
Anyway,
Yeah.
3 minutes. And he suddenly said, "You know what? You remind me of my father." And I tell you what, I feel like I'm a 3-year-old now, waiting outside his office to be reprimanded.
Gosh, in 3 minutes.
Yeah. Now his father was a teacher.
Oh, yeah.
His son was also in the same school. So it's
Okay.
like, he had the headmaster is the standard bearer there, and of course the father all rolled up
Mm.
into one. And I said, "Oh, so how come you see that? Oh, it's the way you frown, just like he did." So he'd gone straight into negative transference.
Yeah.
So I wanted to give that example because of a
Yes.
negative transference.
Mm. Mm.
Now, what you do about it as a
Mhm.
therapist is the important bit,
Okay.
as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody comes in 3 minutes into the first session of a psychotherapy treatment,
Mm-hmm.
you have to think about whether you're going to challenge that transference and say
Mm-hmm.
something, "Oh, I'm not your dad, so jump out of it," or whatever you're going to say, or "I'm not your father, so XXX," and do an adult to adult transaction or attempt to get one. I would tend to just clock that
Mm.
and listen to their story about what they want, first of all,
Mm.
from therapy. Yeah, and then we can go from there. But I wouldn't, in the first 3 minutes of the first session, confront that. I would go with the transference
Mm.
in order to hear his story. I
Yeah.
might cross the transaction and say, and okay, I hear that. And from an adult perspective, what would you like out of therapy? So
Mm.
I'm aiming at an adult to adult process.
Mm-hmm.
Very different from the third, fourth, fifth session in, where I might want to encourage a parent-child transaction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you were to bring that to a client within a few minutes, I'm not sure that it would go very well after that.
It would be disastrous.
Yeah, because the contact would be broken.
Well, yes, and also I think the first step of the therapist is to listen to the story.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, I might say something like, "Well, I'm not your dad. Let's park it for later on. At
Mm.
the moment, let's hear what you've come for."
Mm. Yeah. Well, that's a nice way of acknowledging it, but not stepping into it.
Mm-hmm. So you're right. The focus on building up a robust relationship comes first.
Yeah.
Now, down the line, we
Mm-hmm.
know that the negative transference, which is there perhaps,
Yeah.
might challenge that robust relationship that's being created.
Mm-hmm.
But that's for later on.
Mm. Are you saying then that it doesn't matter the gender of the client's family, that they could project anyone onto us and anything onto us. So,
well, as I believe in transference per se, I think we all move around outside therapy, inside therapy in a transferential world. So I was listening to, some news about Trump the other day, and I know my transference onto him. And so we move into a transferential world, and people like these sorts of authority figures, they also stoke transference. So we live in a world of projection. Now, having said all that lot, then we need to consider, I think, that gender in psychotherapy process. Now, for lots of reasons, not just because of transference, but also because of things like somebody comes to you and they've been sexually abused. You wouldn't pass them to a man, would you?
Yeah.
If they've been abused by a man.
Yes, if the man was the abuser, yeah.
You wouldn't do that, would you?
No, absolutely not, no.
So there are some important, criteria here.
So do you ask clients then when they come for assessments at MIP?
Always.
Okay.
Always. Several questions. I explain the therapies about, the past affecting the present.
Yeah.
I'm after looking at their support mechanisms. I'm after, I need to bring their parents in some way, where they came from, are they still alive? Did you get on with them? Have they split up? Who brought you up, and XXX. So I ask those things. And somewhere along the line, and usually at the end, because I say something like, no, it's my job now to think of therapists that will suit you. And I've got several, but just to help me along the way, does gender come into this? Now, that's an interesting question. And so I'm very interested in the answer. I get a myriad of answers. So let's take 5 assessments in the last 3 or 4 days. One of them said to that question, no, it doesn't really matter at all.
Yeah.
Somebody said, yes, it really matters to me. I really want a woman. Oh, that's interesting because, I never really got on my father. I'd like to have a therapist that is a woman. Right? Or you might get, and I didn't get it the last 2 days, somebody who says, well, I was intimidated or abused or whatever by a male figure, then I would automatically pass them. So they would say that. And then you get people who've come along, and I'm thinking of one of the people in this week who'd had 3 other therapists, which he hadn't got on with. Now, and left pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Now, that could be for several reasons. It doesn't happen because of gender.
Yeah.
When I asked that question, he said, well, I've had 3 therapists, never worked out, and I think it's because they're a woman. Because in my history, I had a very challenging relationship with my mother. So I'd really like to go with a male.
Yeah.
So, I know, obviously, that in looking through the transference lens, that people can transfer many female or male qualities onto either sex. I know all that.
Yeah.
But I tend to go with what the client wants. Now, occasionally, the client can say, especially if they've been to therapy before, oh, right, well, I think it is important to have X because I didn't get on with X, so it might give me a different experience.
Yeah, that's the reparative stuff. Yeah,
so it depends really, but I follow mostly with what the client says.
Clients have already decided that it's okay to work with me being a woman by the time they come to me, but I am interested in how how they come to you, and is it a real issue for them? But I guess there's a whole myriad of responses. So
you are correct. If they haven't come, if they've come by recommendation, or they've chosen you from different sites, and you're not somebody who does an assessment, for example, that just picked you out of a book or something, then I still think it's an interesting question.
Yes, yeah. I always ask, how did you come by?
Oh, you do? What do you say?
I say, why did you choose me, or how did you get my number, or
Well,
something.
that's different.
It is different, yes.
And I think that's
Yeah,
a completely different
yeah.
question. So if
Yeah, yeah.
you said something, my suggestion, and you don't have to do this, but if you did say something, oh, it's interesting you've got XXX,
Mm.
and had you thought at all about what type of therapist you want in terms of gender? Is that important for you?
Yeah, I don't ask about gender, and I might go back to my assessment now, and I just say, why did you choose me, or how come you chose me? So, but people usually say, recommendation actually, and so it's not a specific choosing me out of a book or a
You
website.
don't go a step further and say, I hear I was recommended, and because I'm a female therapist, is that a positive for you, or does it not matter?
Yeah, no, I don't ask that, so I'm now going to think about that and maybe change that. It's
Well, it's an interesting. I just think it's
It is
interesting.
interesting, yeah, yeah. I do get it with couples, and quite sometimes there has been, oh, I thought my husband had worked better with a man, but we can't, there's all the male therapists are full, or something like that. A suggestion that in a couple that a male might have been preferred, but that's not many either, if I'm honest. Um,
I guess many therapists don't, or counsellors perhaps don't persevere with queries. So, for example,
mm,
if somebody said, "Well, I think my husband might have preferred a man," I would say, "Oh, that's interesting. How come you might?"
yeah. Mm,
Because that could be her projection. It might not be his.
mm.
Oh, I know what's best for him because he didn't have a very good father relationship. Of course, he needs a man. You know, it's like it's interesting
It
what
is.
projections and expectations and hypothesis in their answer.
Mm. Yes, and you've made me think about that. So I'm going to start asking that now. And yeah, I wonder if I'm a little bit trying to work through the intake information, and so yeah, missing a trick with the gender.
Yeah, well, maybe. And what about cultural implications?
What do you mean about
Well,
me?
I'm just
My
thinking many cultures where men
mm.
are held up with a certain deference to females.
Yes, yeah, yeah, they are.
And many cultures where the person, oh, I have to see a man because of X. I
Mm.
was just thinking of a client I came in today for me. She was from, well, I don't know what part of India, Muslim, and she was saying she gets on with men much better because culturally they were um, taught to look up to men.
Mm. Yes.
So I'm not talking about right and wrongs here. I'm just talking about the importance, I think, to think about, especially for me when I do the assessments.
Mm. It's interesting you say that though, because what I do hear from clients quite a lot is that they want to know that I get it, that I get them or their situation, or so I'm surprised to hear that a woman would prefer to work with a man.
Oh, culturally, a
Mm.
lot.
That surprises me. Mm.
Well, just think of the Muslim religion. Just to think of, you can think yourself of India, Pakistan. We could go through them. It doesn't mean I don't want the listeners to think that they wouldn't want to work with a woman. But in my experience, I think it's important to think of the cultural aspects
Yes, yeah.
of of what it's been like for them.
Mm. Yeah. And that will come into lots of it might be like the queer community or
Yeah, that's a really good one to think
yeah.
about.
Mm.
Yeah, so you would, so for the queer community, what would you be thinking then for yourself around this question about gender?
My first point is that I might not know, they might have to teach me some scenarios, for example, that I might not know. But I'd say that with all clients really, that I might not have the skill set. So that's something that we're working out from the very beginning. Have I got the skills to work with you? And is it okay that I'm not, I don't know, your religion or your sexuality. Like, that's something for us to explore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
or
right.
or neurodiversity, that will happen a lot. So, but that is something, yeah, in the early days that we really talk about, because what would that be like for them working with me when I haven't got experience of that, whatever it is that's happening. So, once we explore it, then they're not that bothered.
That's
Well,
your experience.
yeah, my experience, yeah, yeah. Well, they stay. I always have a list of people to refer on to.
Oh, interesting. You see, I think also being a male therapist for 38 years clinically, and I would say, I don't know, 70. I hate percentages, but a large percentage of people have been are female or have been female. More males more recently, I think, but a large number of clients are female.
Mm-hmm.
So it does become an important question, I think, because now, certainly in the world of countertransference.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I was brought up in a family, and I had a sister I loved greatly. We were adopted, and we adopted together.
Yeah.
So I know, not just because of an experience of my sister, but I know because I think it comes from experience of my sister, actually, that I actually naturally probably transact better with women.
Ah, yeah. Mm.
And that's because not only because I had a younger sister I shared everything with and we were very close, but I had a father that was totally absent,
Mm-hmm.
very neglectful, withdrawn. And, I know that when my daughter was born, before she was born, 26 years ago, Steph said to me, and she comes from a big family of 4 or 5 brothers and I think 4 sisters as well. She said, "Do you mind what we were discussing whether we're going to know what sex it is?" And then she said, "Do you mind if it's a female or a girl or a boy?" Now, I can't remember what I said back, but if I was completely honest, even though it had been a boy, I would have just welcomed a boy and everything else that goes with that. But before, if I was given a choice, I'd have picked a girl.
Because you find it easier to be around girls or women or transacting with them.
Transacting with the females. Now, having said all that, it doesn't mean I don't work well with males.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting, in terms of counter-transference,
Yeah.
interesting, what I will transfer, onto the different genders.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking about my therapy and how I chose women, and then actually when I chose a man, that was brilliant therapy. So, and it was really good for me in a reparative way.
Well, that's right, Kelly. So that's what I'm saying. It's not right or wrong. So I don't want anyone to hear this. This is much more about, in this podcast, helping or asking, encourage people just to reflect through the transferential lens and think about it. It doesn't. I don't know. People might not influence any of their decisions in them as a psychotherapist and their training. But I would have thought in their training as a counsellor or a psychotherapist, that would have come into the mix somewhere.
Yes.
It's a very interesting subject.
It is, yeah. I mean, transference in itself is a massive topic. I'm sure we could do quite a few podcasts on transference, but gender for sure, yeah.
Yeah, because we transfer onto the other our historical experiences. And if the therapist is a reparative style in terms of therapy, then it will be about the therapist maybe stepping into the transference, maybe rather than just talking about it.
Yes.
And providing them with an experience or a recorrective experience that they didn't have, and that could be the healing.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the main aim of therapy, really, isn't it?
Well, in not all therapies, CBT,
no,
you don't go anywhere near the past.
Yeah. Do they not? Not at all?
No.
Oh,
I stay in
okay.
the present, dealing with thought change,
Mm.
which then leads theoretically to behavioural change.
Mm.
They don't deal with the past.
Mm. To leave it where it is.
Yeah, I mean, if it comes, I'm not saying a CBT therapist, and I didn't train in CBT therapy, so I don't want to really talk too much about it. But I would imagine, CBT therapists have been trained to stay in the here and now and look at the thinking in the here and now, and looking at mood changes and plotting different mood changes and overthinking, rather than look at how the past affects the present.
Yeah, exploring where that's come from. Yeah.
Yeah. And Gestalt psychotherapy, I could think of many different types of therapy,
Mm.
which doesn't have the palliative therapy
Mm.
at the core of what they would call healing.
Mm.
I mean, we do, because you trained
Yeah.
in transactional analysis.
Mm.
I trained in transactional analysis. I trained in integrative psychotherapy, and I trained in psychoanalysis. And I'm very psychodynamic. And all of them
Mm.
are how the past affects the present.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Eric Byrne, who was the
Mm.
originator of transactional analysis, and he came from a very sort of psychoanalytical background because his therapists were psychoanalysts, Paul
Mm.
Verdon and Eric Erickson. When he created his version of transactional analysis in 1958, his focus of cure, or if you want to put it that way, is how can I explain it? Building up a robust adult,
Yes.
not going into the history.
Mm-hmm.
Might talk about the history,
Yeah.
might talk about their script,
Mm.
might talk about the parent ego state,
Mm.
might talk about their younger self, but wouldn't go into it.
Mm.
That's Eric Byrne.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, we're a million miles away from that
Yes. Yeah.
in the style of TA therapy that you and me are talking about.
Mm. Mm.
But, I was thinking of all the counsellors listening to this podcast,
Mm. Yeah.
and where they trained in person-centered counselling,
Mm.
or they trained in different aspects of counselling, which may or may not have going to the past as one of their top priorities.
Mm. Well, not as a priority. The person-centered approach is about staying in the here and now, isn't it? But the past comes in.
Well, depends. I'm not. I could talk a lot about different modalities.
Yes, don't do that, because that's in another few
It
sessions.
takes us towards another podcast.
Yes.
I hope people listening to this have had some, thinking about whether gender plays or not. And I
Yes.
think it does. Or at
Yes.
least consider that.
Definitely. Yeah, and I do as well. But of course, you see it firsthand in the choice of the client, and what they choose. But then, yeah, and it's made me think of that. Actually, I'm going to start talking about that. Yeah, with
I need to think about it, because I think it brings a different perspective.
Yeah, and it's a lovely way in for clients to talk about the history and who's the significant other that maybe they need to do the work on.
Let me tell you, in my experience, training groups, I've trained for 30 years, people with therapists. The most challenging training groups is when there's only one gender.
What, as the trainee?
Or if it was all female, because there's no balance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we look at therapy groups, now I know I'm talking to a group psychotherapist that probably thinks about who goes into the group and who doesn't go into the group and everything else. But there's many people who, especially I supervise, and I say, how many people in your group? And we may find out they're all women.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of transference, in terms of male objects and things like that, that's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
So should we? And I said, I'll ask you actually, in your running of your groups, do you pay any consideration in a balance of the genders?
Good question. And that's not my primary thought. I have got a balanced group. Well, I have got both genders in the group. So, but that isn't my primary thought, I guess, because it's who's ready to go in. Have I got space?
It doesn't have to be a primary thought, but I think it's an interesting one.
It is, yes. I have had a group where it's only female.
And that's different again. I bet my bottom dollar that the transferential dynamic in an all gender group was female or male, and you're a female therapist, so it's completely different than the balanced one.
Yes. I prefer it to be a mixed group, mixed gender. I do prefer it.
Interesting topic there.
It is interesting, yes. And I've learned some more things. I mean,
okay, so I love talking about that, by the way.
Yeah, well, there's always more titles to create, Bob, so you can shove that in.
What's the one for next week?
The next week is choosing different routes in the therapy process, and does it matter?
Well, that's all about,
but we'll talk about that in the next one.
I'll start off on that, won't I? And then we'll never end this bloody podcast.
It's really good to see you, Bob.
I love our podcast, but I was just thinking about how I could just go off, couldn't I? So let's boundary that. And thanks for this discussion. It's been useful. Yes,
it has. I've enjoyed it too. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Yes, see you next week. Bye-bye.
Take care.
You've been listening to The Therapy Show, Behind Closed Doors podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We'll be back next week with another episode.